Jeremy and the Sleagur by Will Reed. Chapter 7. Sorcery. Holding the bulging script brought home just how much Jeremy had to learn. Every page glowed with Cinderella's lines lit up in bright blue highlighter. "Scene 3, please, everyone." Miss Fairley clapped her hands together with a piercing smack. Jeremy got on his hands and knees and began to scrub the floor. Kirsty drifted towards him, silently looming overhead. It made Jeremy shudder. Kirsty seemed to be drinking in the moment of cruelty that her character of Lady Tremaine would be giving Cinderella. "Over there," she demanded, pointing to a patch of ground which Jeremy obediently started to scrub. "Scrub harder, you pathetic child," Kirsty said too loudly in his ear. "I don't know why I keep you, paying a fortune to keep you from the streets. You probably scare the rats away anyway, with that awful smell and ugly face." She finished by stamping Jeremy's head into the grainy floor. Helena, watching next to Miss Fairley, jumped to his aid and protested. The teacher lightly dismissed it with a mysterious gesture. "Shh, it's acting, darling. Bravo, Kirsty, very believable." The teacher swished to the prop cupboard. Behind her back, Kirsty smirked down at Jeremy. Helena helped him up. "Don't worry, we'll get her back," she whispered. Bang! The prop cupboard door slammed shut. Miss Fairley's shriek muffled through the thick door. "Ooh!" The children gawked, wondering what to do. After a moment of nothing, a few girls muttered and let out a breath. The wind must have blown it shut. The door handle turned, and Miss Fairley's voice called, "Can you open the door, please?" They glanced around at each other, each child checking which one would step forwards. The door thumped with a more panicked voice, "Open this up!" Helena started towards it, but a twitch of something caught her eye and made her freeze, staring. The top page of her script trembled as if a slight breeze had caught it. But Helena hadn't felt any wind. "Well, go and open the door, Prince Farming," Kirsty instructed, pointing her sharp chin at the door. "She's such a teacher's pet," she said snootily to a minion, hesitating too when she noticed a movement. Another fluttering had lifted the first few pages. The rest of the children followed Helena and Kirsty's attention towards the script. One side of it lifted impossibly and remained in the air for a moment, curling into a letter J, before flopping back down. Jeremy felt a dribble of sweat run down his back. The script jerked across the table, skidding to the other side, teetering over the edge. The children backed away, their faces pale and frightened. Definitely not the wind. The wad of paper then overbalanced and tumbled towards the floor. A few girls squealed, but it didn't hit the floor. They were transfixed as the script hovered over the ground. Jeremy glanced around for hidden wires or cameras, wondering if this was an elaborate prank. He couldn't see any. Was this really magic? The paper pad rose up. The children watched the front page tear itself free, screwing up into a tight ball. "What are you doing, freak?" Kirsty squeaked at Helena. The table behind her groaned and screeched across the floor as she backed into it. The balled-up paper darted across the room, hitting her in the forehead. Helena looked confused and frightened as another sheet tore off and soared at Kirsty, who climbed away, retreating from the increasing barrage of missiles. The rest of the girls screamed from behind their hiding places around the room, under chairs and tables. Jeremy gaped at his friend. Helena was grey in horror. Her script tore the last 2 pages apart, and both launched at the cowering Kirsty. "How are you doing that?" Jeremy asked unsteadily. She shook her head. An old, torn, tattered shirt rose into the air. its ghostly arms waving, and soared straight at Jeremy. He cried out and dived behind the corner of the stage. Helena looked at her hands in wonder as finally Miss Fairlie burst out of the cupboard and into the mayhem. Any trace of her usual excited expression replaced by a sweaty pink look of thunder. Mrs. Warbling, of course, hadn't believed a word of it when everyone had gabbled out what had happened. The only thing she had picked up on was that everyone seemed to agree that it was something Helena had done, which meant detentions for a whole month, and she was banned from rehearsals for all of that time. Luckily, the Sleagur had been around to play with. The creature had grown since Jeremy had first met it, more than 4 times the size, almost as big as him. If Jeremy hadn't known that it was friendly, the Sleagur would have looked quite frightening.
"Sounds scary,"
the Sleagur said when they both flopped down on the grass after playing together in the secret place. It was really frightening. Mind you, it was cool that she threw all of those paper balls at Kirsty. She did deserve it, Jeremy reflected.
"That's true,"
the Sleagur nodded.
"But it might be a good idea to avoid Helena for a bit, just until she's safe."
It patted Jeremy's foot, leaving a gluey handprint. "She's my friend," Jeremy said adamantly, "even if she can do magic."
"You're so loyal, Jeremy. I admire that about you."
The Sleagur smiled at Jeremy, lazily picking its bottom and sucking its finger.
"Still, she might be dangerous. It's a bit worrying that she's so strange,"
it said as the finger was slurped into its mouth before a replacement grew back. Jeremy nodded. It was a bit frightening.
"Different and scary. Same sort of thing, really," it continued. "Perhaps just don't hang around her so much, eh? Compromises. After all, she might accidentally hurt you."
They both fell into thoughtful silence. "You're different though, aren't you?" Jeremy looked at his weird friend.
"Oh no, I'm a very ordinary Sleagur."
The Sleagur shook its head.
"And I'm your fairy god Sleagur, aren't I?"
it said, straightening up proudly.
"Anyway, you're the strange one. You wouldn't even need me if it wasn't for you being peculiar, would you? You'd still be friends with Martin, and Mum and Dad wouldn't be fighting, would they?"
Jeremy looked shocked at the Sleagur. "What do you mean?"
"Well, I'm only saying that, you know," the Sleagur went on in a more hesitant voice, "that if you hadn't been Cinderella, then none of this would have happened. It would have been safer for you. That's all I'm saying. I'm only thinking of you."
It patted Jeremy's foot again. Maybe the Sleagur was right. Could it all be Jeremy's own fault? Everyone around him seemed upset because of him. Martin, Mum and Dad, Helena, even Kirsty. Was he being selfish and hurting everyone around him? He loved being Cinderella. She was so special, so kind. He even loved the dancing scene with Helena as Prince Charming, and was thrilled to see what the ball dress would look like. Was that odd? He wondered to himself, that he was looking forward to wearing a girl's dress? The Sleagur watched Jeremy's face, its own expression unreadable.